And we are live. And ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to another episode of Breaking News or Mina Breaking News show. And today I am with my two special guests. I wouldn't call them guests, it's two special friends, uh, Bryson, an aerospace engineer, and none other than Mr. Eduardo Spencer, an motorsport journalist and F1 journalist. How are you guys doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Not too bad, thank you.
Good, good. Well, before we go any longer, first of all, let's before we start even talking about F1, let's talk about the main event or the main topic that we should not ignore, and that is Le Mans 24. Obviously, it's another back-to-back Ferrari win, and this time it's car 50, not car 51. Hopefully, finger crossed, it's car 83 with Kubica next season. But what do you think, Bryson? Have you watched the race, and what are your thoughts about the race in general?
Yeah, I must be getting slow because I didn't watch the entire race. I watched most of the beginning. I saw some of the safety car parade, and then I watched the finish as well. And I think the weather really played havoc with the race this year. So it's just been a real challenge to actually make sure that I could actually see everything. And I just huge kudos to the people who are out there in the rain. You know, marshals that are out there, but also drivers that are keeping the car actually on the track during these times. So it was a pretty fun race actually.
Mr. Ed, what are your thoughts about the race, and what do you get from it,
I,
or what do you get out of it as your profession in journalism?
yeah, it was definitely a classic, more controversial than last year's race, but definitely I think there was plenty of storylines, plenty of action up and down the order, with the rain as well coming into it. It added that extra element of spice. So it was a very, very good Le Mans, and I think as people have been saying this week, we are only just entering this golden age of sports car racing, and this is really the second stage after Group C. So things can only get better, as the old phrase goes. And for Ferrari, this is a bit of an unexpected win because, coming into it, everyone was talking about Porsche, they were talking about Cadillac, BMW were there, and they pulled it out of the bag with some clever strategy and some good driving. And it avenges the defeats at home at Imola and Spa-Francorchamps. So it also sets up the World Endurance Championship quite nicely.
The other thing that I want to mention, and that is, I've noticed a rise in within the motorsport fans, or mostly from F1 fans, being more attracted to other racing series, such as let's start with IndyCar, and mainly the Indy 500, and then now with Le Mans for second year in a row, and all because of the Ferrari deciding to join Le Mans in last season. And how they do it, they go with a bang and just win it, and stop the dominance or end the dominance of Toyota. And then this year again, this time is car 50, but it didn't look like it was going one way. There was multiple times where you would have expect multiple cars had the chance to win, and then things just went differently. So, not to draft away from just analyzing the race itself, like you can see there's a surge of people needing to watch something exciting. Before we get into if the season of this year, there's definitely a lot of exciting things to look up into in this year's F1 season. Um, and there's more to look up to in the coming races. We still have like what 14 races left, I think, or 13. So yeah, but I think what people want is to see more exciting series, and I think WEC now has a big surge with Lamborghini joining this season. And big shout out to our friend Blake for his first 24 Le Mans. And you have, as I said, mentioned Ferrari, Cadillac did not have a bad run at all. Penske, Porsche as well, and who knows who could join in the upcoming seasons of WEC. We could even see other big names, like who knows if Mercedes decide to be like, you know what, let's stop focusing about F1 and look into other motorsport series options. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Bryson?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking forward to Aston Martin coming in next year. I think that's the one that everyone kind of has their eye on. In terms of just beautiful, gorgeous hypercars, I think it's sort of a neck and neck for me between the Bugatti Bolide and the Valkyrie AMR Pro, which is probably the closest car to what the hypercar would look like. But yeah, I mean, just a beautiful time in motorsports. Good to actually see some familiar faces involved in racing, which is actually pretty cool. But definitely a situation where you can understand why people can be drawn to other types of racing because they generally are quite closer. I mean, again, there's a slightly controversial conversation to be had about balance of performance and how it's implemented and all that kind of stuff. But in general, you would like to see cars that really, as you said, you don't know who's going to actually win the race. It could have gone any number of ways depending on pit stops and when people had to change to wet tires and all kinds of things. So that's exactly what you want to see. We are starting to see a little bit of that more in Formula One. It's already quite clear that 2024 is not going to be anywhere near as dominant for Red Bull as 2023 was, and perhaps not even 2022, the way things are going. So I think this season still has a lot of surprises for us, maybe even some surprise winners. We'll see who actually ends up taking the top step.
We'll see. Ed, your thoughts on what we can say the future of World Endurance Championship, and with the coming names to join up, and what to expect even from other big manufacturers or factory teams to join up again.
Well, the interesting thing about WEC next year is the fact that all manufacturers must have at least two cars in the race. There's no possibility of only having one, like is Otto Francesi. You know, you've got to put two in, and it's going to stretch the manufacturers a little bit, but it should at least get maybe one or two more teams come in. I'm excited to see Aston Martin come with a Valkyrie. I think it's been a long time coming. There was a brief possibility of them entering when the regulation started, which was 21, 22, but that got put aside for the Formula One project. Now they have, the cars ready to go in 2025. They'll be in business. I would like to see maybe one or two manufacturers, particularly Mercedes. I think they have unfinished business over the CLR gate but Peter Dunbreck and Mark Webber went for a flying lesson, unfortunately for them. And also, I wouldn't mind seeing McLaren since they've had a little bit of presence in the GC category, so it would be nice to see them come back. But there is that concern of having too many manufacturers spoiling the broth, and we've got to remember their privateers need to be in the field, particularly the ones that Glickenhaus and Van Wall, who weren't there this year. They need to be there as well and create that melting pot of manufacturers, whether they're big or whether they're small.
And I agree with you on that note. I think there's a lot to look into, and as you mentioned, like the Valkyrie as well. And I'm sure it's not gonna just stop at the Valkyrie. We could end up having other big surprises, especially in the hypercar department. We could be seeing much more than what we're looking at right now. And it's not a dig at another racing series, but from what I've been watching WEC for the last 4 seasons, Le Mans for the last 3 years. I think, in my opinion, I haven't seen a more of a racing series collectively, either as teams and everyone around. It's like they're supportive with each other. Nobody's pushing anyone away. Nobody's just like waking up and yapping like the Kardashians and going to the FIS stewards room and complain every 2 minutes, every day, every something. You feel like there is a sort of support, and those teams and those personnels knows if something is wrong, something is wrong. If something's not wrong, there's no reason to dwell around it. Just like what happened with the Alpine this year. They had a very strong pace. Mick was doing phenomenal stints, but just reliability hit. And then you go into their own personal profile. You see the support. They have with. You see the support they have from other teams to their social media, as if they work with them. And you see when Aston Martin announced that they're joining, how all other teams are actually super pumped. So what I mean, even as team owners, team principals, admins, everyone is supportive. Everyone wants others to join into the sport. They don't want to gatekeep it from what we see from F1, for example. And we're gonna get to F1 and Andretti and all that later. So let's get into talking about the 24 season in Formula One. Uh, a boring start, if I may say. We all thought we are in for another 2023. RB20 is gonna give us a replica of what the RB19 did, but no, things just start to look different. Australia, Max DNF. We said, well, it's just because of the tear off. Otherwise, if Max stayed in, he could have won. Um, and we know we get another curveball. Miami comes in, and we thought Max is going to get that win because of the safety car anyway. But so no matter how much Lando's going to stretch his legs, he's going to catch him. That did not happen. Imola, we thought Max is running away with it definitely. Then we saw Lando turn up to a prime RTN center in those last 10 laps and pull in 8/10 per lap. 8/10 per lap without no damage, no anything. It was scary to watch. And I think we're even more in for more races like that. So I'm going to go and start ahead with you, Bryson. What are your thoughts on this season, and what do we expect from even teams that we think that they're on the back foot, like Mercedes?
Yeah, it is so interesting. I mean, the old adage in Formula One is failing to move forward is the same thing as moving backwards in Formula One, because everyone is constantly developing their cars, everyone's constantly getting faster. And let's be clear, the RB20 is still faster than the RB19. It's a faster car overall. It sets faster lap times, but it's where the rest of the field is in comparison to it that's very interesting. And as we said, we're starting to push to the real measurable limits of what you can actually achieve in this regulation cycle. And when that happens, it actually seems to expose all of the little, quirks and weird things that the car can do. How does it ride the bumps? Does it handle those well? How does it warm up the tires? How does it handle different compounds? Even, I mean, it's so interesting. The example that you gave about Imola with Max and with Lando, the first half of that race, it looked like a normal, Red Bull win easily. But when the tire compounds changed, it actually changed the dynamic rather dramatically. And so simply going on to a different tire compound, having that much of a swing effect on how the race is progressing, tells us that things are just inherently much, much closer. And let's not forget, the RB20, when it was launched, was heralded as a very aggressive design. It could have been far more conservative, far more similar to the RB19, given how successful it was. But they pulled out all stops and tried to be as aggressive as they could, and it still is not seemingly being enough, right? I mean, it's impressive how things have closed up. And again, we have to be a little bit careful here because even though there are some tracks where we call them more traditional, we would expect Red Bull to win easily. Miami and Imola are probably good examples. The real benchmark is probably going to be Barcelona, right? Because Barcelona is a circuit that Red Bull has just absolutely owned in this set of regulations. They've been so good there. There are curbs and bumps and things, but we've taken out the final chicane now, so that's not going to be a problem. There's more high-speed corners. If Red Bull has difficulty in Barcelona, then we actually have a real fight for at least the Constructors' Championship this year, if not the Drivers' Championship. So the season overall is definitely hotting up. You mentioned Mercedes. Mercedes is a very interesting story because they have shown us repeatedly, time and time again, that they are talking about making developments, learning new things they didn't know before, and bringing performance to certain races. And there are spikes where it actually is a reasonably well-performing car, and it gives you that hope that maybe they finally have something they'll bring that performance to the rest of the season. And then it kind of fades, or it only lasts in FP1. It's been such a strange situation. But actually, if you look at the trend of Mercedes this season over the past 2 or 3 races, they actually have become more and more competitive. And if you ever needed a measure for whether or not a team's actually competitive or not, look at other teams complaining about their performance. Right? Talk about flexing wings, talk about all that kind of stuff. When you hear that kind of chatter about rule breaking, that's when you know a team really is building pace. So I definitely think that Mercedes is probably showing some of the best signs of life that they've shown since the regulation started, arguably, even though they won a race in 2022. I think that there's a potential for them to be in a very good position as the season progresses. But again, these cars are so complex, and how they interact with the driver's driving style is so subtle, and how it changes with circuit to circuit. You can't really predict these things with perfect accuracy, but I'm definitely optimistic about their chances.
Ed, I'm sure as somebody who've been around the F1 paddock and heard shadows here and there, people talking left and right. I don't know if you remember back in April, um, Adrian Newey have mentioned something, and this is, by the way, before Adrian Newey even announces his departure from Red Bull. He said something in the comments that they feel like the learning curve, they have reached almost the peak of the learning curve. Like the learning curve now is about to flatten. Like it's not as skyrocketing as they were when they were bringing every time an upgrade, they're getting 3 tenths, 4 tenths, and they're just basically flying ahead of the pack. Um, do you think that we're actually reaching that, yeah, the peak of that learning curve for the Red Bull, or it's just a tactics teams would use with the media, throw something out there, let the people hope and dream, and stun them with some, yeah, some crazy pace in whatever races, and just take everything away from under their feet.
Certainly, I think Red Bull have had a bit of a tricky start to the season. Bearing in mind, as Bryson said, it's a very radical design. It's almost a bit like a Mercedes style design with the no side pods and the massive cannon near the cockpits, and it's a very different looking car. So they've had to understand it a bit more, and they've had to play about it. Max has not been entirely happy with it over the weekends, and of course he has the odd comment about the downshifts, which is now part and parcel of every Grand Prix weekend. But it seems like they're finding their feet with it. I think the troubles they had in Australia and also in Imola, for example, when it was really Max's win, not Red Bull's, is starting to fade down now, and it's more or less we're going to the upgrade season, and Barcelona, as mentioned, is the real test of where the pecking order stands. We also have to mention the fact that Red Bull Ring is usually a very good circuit for Red Bull, and they should be able to go well there. And that's going to be where we know whether we'll have a title fight or not. But I think it's also a sign that the competition's closed up. McLaren have closed up. Ferrari closed up. Mercedes getting there. I mean, talk about parts of Mercedes being illegal. I mean, what year is this? 2015? It feels like a return to the old days. So it is definitely closing up, but I can just about see Red Bull having the edge still.
I mean, bring in the Mercedes, and as you said, like, so we're not in 2014, 2015 when you can just say, "Oh yeah, Mercedes has certainly did something illegal to be that far ahead." But and I know a lot of people took it as a sign of hope that, hey, look, Red Bull's complaining. That means we are back, baby. But yeah, you never know. It could be absolutely nothing. The one thing that I would love to mention, I had a feeling, and I never doubted James Allison, but I also owe him an apology because I was familiar with him with his game, but now I'm more unfamiliar with his game than ever before. This man, and also I don't want to be going out here and please to all the listeners, thank you for being here. I just want to mention and put something out. This is not me making things up or trying to create or steer the pot or create scenarios. We have seen, and this is not me, this is just me quoting what I've read in some couple of articles. And if I had the links, I would put them out here. And maybe next time I should be coming more prepared if I'm going to mention things like this and put the links. Some people don't come, be like, where's your source? Mercedes did not directly mention, but they have kind of pointed out that they have took some people out of the team in a nice manner of saying they fired some couple of people out of the team. that they think we're responsible in not having the right correlation between the simulator, the wind tunnel, and this and this and this and that. Again, this is not, I'm saying exactly what they're saying, but if you read it between the lines, they were just trying to be nice. And you have to look at it into also a human perspective. You don't affect people's lives in the future, because if this person want to go and apply for another job in the future, and there's, let's say, an article about him doing something massively wrong, and people do mistakes at the end of the day, uh, it could affect his career at the end of the day. And this is how the modern world goes. So ever since that, Mercedes again mentioned that now they have a full vision on knowing how this car will work. And especially after Imola, when we saw James Allison walking out with his nose, and Ted Kravitz walked right into that joke, the nose joke. And James looked all smiley and happy and said, like, yeah, we have the right numbers now. We know what we're doing. We're going to work on our upgrades properly this time, and knowing exactly what we're bringing on the sim, we'll get about something 99% similar to what we see it on the track. And yeah, it did show, but that does not mean necessarily what we saw in Canada is exactly Mercedes back. We could come to Barcelona and Mercedes will get stunned by Ferrari and McLaren, and they're all the way back again, some 2, 3 tenths, 4 tenths off the pace from the others. Um, but the one thing you have to admire from James is that he took a car from 2023, throw it all in the bin, kept just the steering wheel basically, build a whole new chassis, him and everyone in the factory, a whole new design. And this is the third time Mercedes or fourth time Mercedes does this in the span of 3 years. You've changed the car multiple times, and then you show up with an entirely new car, not knowing where it's going to stand in the middle of the pack. And that's what we saw in Bahrain, in Saudi, and many other races where they were almost nowhere near. But now things looks different. But Spain could be the actual judgment for Mercedes and where they almost exactly stand, and things could change. Speaking about McLaren, we've seen McLaren probably is one of the biggest gainers of this regulation, going from almost in the middle of the pack in the midfield to now a serious contender to even take multiple wins off Red Bull's belt. Um, as everyone called Mika Hakkinen a madman, I think at the end of the day he was right when he said that McLaren is the one to be in competition, competing with the Red Bull. This is back in 2023. Do we think if McLaren keeps up with this jumps in the upgrades could actually be a threat in the Red Bull and specifically in the constructors, or do we think Red Bull could simply just bounce back and show us all this was just a dream that we lived in, and yeah, none of that will happen? Bryson.
Yeah, this idea of it being a dream is actually quite funny because I'm sure, based on some of the things that Helmut Marko has said in the past, he's definitely deliberately said some things to mislead the public as far as how good Red Bull actually is. So that's always going to be a fun possibility. But just to circle back a little bit on the question of Mercedes briefly, and they're losing people and gaining people, I think we should just be humble about how incredibly complicated these machines are. Every team employs geniuses. I promise you, I've met some of them. Sometimes you have to be the right type of genius even, or just have the right experience. It's a very complex thing. It takes time for people's influence to actually show up in the car. And also this question of correlation, it's not something that you either have or you don't. You're kind of always constantly changing it. The wind tunnels are evolving because you're getting older. The test data is becoming more refined. I mean, these things are incredibly complex. So I just wanted to make sure we're all aware that it could happen to anybody to have a difficult run after being successful for a long time. But McLaren is actually very interesting. So the short answer to your question is, I definitely think we have a fight for the Constructors' Championship. Not so much because McLaren is so incredibly, high performing, although they are very high performing. It's really that Red Bull has a very asymmetrically constructed team where Max is scoring the lion's share of the points, And in an era where Red Bull's car was much more competitive, that was less of a problem. But now it's becoming a really serious problem. And well, I don't think that the drivers' championship is under threat at all. I really do believe that the constructors' championship is absolutely under threat because Max is basically fighting both Ferraris, both McLarens, both Mercedes potentially now, and they're all taking points away from him that are not being scored by Checo at this particular time. So we'll see if they can get a bit more parity between the driver performances, but I definitely think that a constructors championship fight is definitely on the cards. As far as what the performance ceiling of McLaren might actually be, I'm not sure. I think we need to remind ourselves just how much performance they've actually gained. Think about where they were in 2022 or where they were in the early part of 2023. They were nowhere, and they gained like literally a second a lap over the season. But I haven't seen gains like that since 2009 or something. When they first tried that regulation set change, people were finding all kinds of lap time. So I think that we should allow ourselves the hope that McLaren has something special, that they can deliver even more pace than they have, and they can genuinely fight Red Bull on pace without extraneous factors like damage or weather conditions or what have you. They also have the benefit of an extremely strong driver pairing. I think Oscar Piastri, who also has like an engineering background, so I'm kind of a fan of him anyway, but Oscar Piastri proved his worth to that team within the first like 3 or 4 races. I mean, he was right there with Lando in a lot of ways. I mean, he still probably has a bit of work to do to learn how to coax these Pirelli tires into lasting over an entire race stint. I think Lando's better at that, but in pure pace, he's really excellent. So I think McLaren has an extremely strong team. Ferrari has a very strong team too, but McLaren seems to be a little bit more consistent in recent races.
Ed, Bryson brought up a good point here. That is one of the reasons why we might have a strong fight for the constructors is not mainly a reason because of other teams' performance. They are truly performing well, but not to the extent that it means they have the pace more than Checo's recent form is just taking chunks out of Red Bull's constructors points, and I think if it wasn't, and this is just me saying, if it wasn't for Ferrari blunder that we saw in Canada, the pressure would have been even more on, because we've seen, I think both cars did not score points. Yeah, they did not score points, both of them, and that was just the little breather of air that they got, at least to breathe for one race before walking into Spain. So, what are your thoughts? Do you think? Okay, I don't want to make this more dramatic or make it sound dramatic, but just a question. Do you think re-signing Checo was the right idea to take pressures off him, or was re-signing him put more pressure on him? That's just a question I'm asking.
It's a difficult question. I think people being surprised by the news that Checo was going to be re-signed is quite laughable. I openly bragged that I knew about it as early as September, October time that he was going to be re-signed. So it was not unexpected to me at all. But the performances, I would say, since China have been really, really poor. Miami, he didn't do particularly great. Imola knocked out in Q2, that put him on the back foot for the race. Monaco was a bit of a disaster, and Canada was arguably one of his worst weekends yet in Red Bull colours. So I think it's an interesting question, because obviously you want the driver's confidence to be there when he gets in the car, knowing that, hey, your future's safe. You just do what you've got to do. But the problem is with Checo, he has so many highs and has so many lows, and now he's costing the team more points. 2023, it didn't really matter because Max was crushing it every weekend, left, right, and centre. But now Checo is dropping the ball a bit more. It's starting to feel more effective. And of course, McLaren are getting there through the fact they've got a great package, they've got a fantastic driver lineup, and they've also got the very good leadership of Andrea Stella, who is, I think, been kind of forgotten about in this whole McLaren upturn in fortune. So there is a feeling in my mind. I wouldn't be surprised if there is performance clauses in Checo's contract to say you've got to do something, otherwise it will just be a 1-year deal. Yet contracts in this day and age in Formula One don't really mean much. We saw that over the summer of 2022. It could easily happen again. It could be either ripped up or someone might have a buyout. So realistically, Checo has got to get at least a podium in Spain for the talks to simmer down and for him to really focus on what he does best, which is really being a very good number two to Max and getting good haul of points for Red Bull when they need it.
Uh, I don't think I would have said that perfectly. And yeah, you've been bragging about Checo resigning since Big Bang. So I knew well, but I think yeah, you mentioned a good point. There might be a performance clause in his contract that if this keeps up, they might not honor his contract all the way to the end. Obviously, again, this is not a sport. I'm not saying it's not an agenda or anything, but like there are drivers you would really love to see in a very good car. And in the history of F1, not every good driver had a chance to be in a championship contender or race winning car. Not all of them. Some of them had the chance and bite into it and did not let go and did wonders. Some of them had a chance. It's just simply it did not work for them. And you put them in another team who are, let's say, not even race winner contenders, could be just podium contenders. They would take a podium here and there, and he just performs well. So I think you see the amount of drivers they have stacked up in Red Bull, just waiting to take on that seat. You have Liam Lawson, obviously. Daniel Ricciardo wishes to be on that seat, but then again, his performance as well is up to question. There's a little bit of inconsistency, but then in Canada, he just turned up and was like, "Yeah, let me remind you why I'm the Badger." And I think if he keeps up that performance all the way up to the end of the season, who knows? You have Yuki Tsunoda. Everyone is just sleeping on completely. The man who's been said that he's about to be utterly destroyed by his new teammate Nick De Vries. That did not happen, and obviously it came all down from Nick's end of the garage. Not finding the performance he needs. He performed well. I'm saying like as in Yuki found the performance, even got the score points when he teamed up with Liam. Liam took him in one race, but then the remaining races, Yuki had the upper hand. And now with Daniel, it's the same thing. And you just kind of wonder, you're like, if he is not going to get in the Red Bull seat, then what's the point? Why would you have him in that team? Just let him have a chance to go somewhere else. Maybe I'm just here manifesting. Hello, Aston Martin Honda 2026. Honda is part of the reasons why in that team, but he proved why he deserves to have a seat in F1. Then take him to Aston Martin Honda. So yeah, in general, I think Checo has a bit of a mountain to climb. I don't think there's much excuses at this stage for him in his career to make. It's either like you got it or you don't. You have the performance or bella ciao. So yeah, in general, I think yes, we forget in the Ferrari as well, who have a much more experience. I know Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri; those two are, in my opinion, a deadly duo. They just have one thing less than Charles and Carlos have combined, and that is the experience. And sometimes does not mean that they're going to be better than. I'm not saying this driver is better than that driver, but I'm saying sometimes experience does play a factor. Carlos might not be on the same level, and I'm saying it with all love and respect for him because I love Carlos Sainz. He's not on the same level as Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, but his experience played a huge factor in taking a couple of podiums and wins for Ferrari. And yeah, so what do we think about the Ferrari and specifically after what we've seen with them in Canada? And they had upgrades coming and they were like very hopeful this thing can turn up. And well, things ended the way it ended, plus the battery issues, power unit issues, and all that. Do we think this is just a one-off race for them? just one break they're taking, and they will come back strong in Spain. Given that in also 2023 they were not good in Spain, but 2022 they were, but DNFs yada yada. Do we think they could turn up to Spain different this season, or we could just see them against slot in that second fastest, third fastest car on the grid? Bryson.
Yeah, I would say that Ferrari is always going to be a threat. They were potentially a threat, in 2022 at a lot of races. They could have won in France back in 2022 if things had gone slightly differently. They could have won many races last year. Even some of the races even though Max's championship record was impeccable that year, many of those races are actually closer than we kind of gave them credit for. And yes, Canada this year for Ferrari was a bit of an anomaly. It was just strange how, yes, they were dealing with traffic in certain situations and a few reliability issues, but fundamentally they just didn't have the pace. They didn't have pace. And it was such a strange question as to why that happens. But we've seen how sensitive these cars can be to Pirelli's tire constructions. So if you just happen to be out of the window, you could be having a terrible race. But if you happen to get in the window, the car could just be beautiful the entire weekend. So no, definitely can't count out Ferrari. I would definitely hope to see them perform a bit better this upcoming race weekend. But McLaren as well, to be honest. I mean, McLaren, one of their major strengths for the past season was high-speed corners. And Barcelona is sort of the poster child circuit for high-speed corners, especially since the layout reconfiguration without the last chicane. You gain a lot of lap time in those final couple of corners. So definitely keep it out for them. One point that I wanted to make about McLaren as to some of the underlying things that might be actually explaining their performance, let's not forget they have a brand new wind tunnel that came online sort of mid to late, last year, that the effects of which have really started to been feeding into
Before Silverstone.
Yeah, not only did they feed into the launch specification version of the current car, but all the developments that are coming after that. And I think it's more than just a coincidence that how well they're doing actually can correspond to their wind tunnel, their new facilities. And in fact, when you think about Mercedes and some of the issues that they've had, they have correlation issues. The wind tunnel is a big part of that. And sometimes you ask, could that even affect other teams, like customer teams? Aston Martin, for example, shares Mercedes' wind tunnel on the weekends, basically. And so you can imagine that if there were actually correlation issues with Mercedes' tunnel, that it could affect not only Mercedes, but Aston Martin as well. And we know in the past season or so, Aston Martin has gone up and down with radical quickness in terms of upgrades that are supposed to be making the car faster, but don't in reality. I just wanted to connect those dots. But no, definitely looking forward to Barcelona. It really is the true test of where we are this season, where Red Bull is, of course, but also where the other teams are, including Ferrari.
Ed, we need to speak about. I know I want to ask you about Ferrari, but there's one team that we haven't been talking much about. They've had an okay-ish. Why I'm saying okay-ish is given to how much this team have experience in F1. They had an okay-ish race, and that team is Alpine. We've seen in Montreal they managed to get double points, and they just about got it. We've also noticed there's a little bit of tension, a little bit from the radios and from what we heard. Do we think the news about Alpine trying to actually use a different power unit in 2026 are true, or just basically talking the wind? And do we actually think this team could actually pick it up together, just like what Aston Martin did from 2022 to 2023? How McLaren did, and from the second half of 2023, and they came 2024 continuing on that trajectory, going just up, or I think this is just completely all year around to forget for them, and specifically now with all the drivers trying to jump on that, the drivers they have trying to jump on that second seat. You have Duham, you have Mick, and possibly other drivers on the same grid could jump on that seat. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, let's address the elephant in the room regarding the engine. Luca Di Maio, who is the CEO of Renault Group, has said full well, we are not selling Alpine to any other buyer. So that gives me a feeling that he will keep the engine project as well, because there is a massive engine project going on at Viri. But it's not the first time that Team Enstone has used a different engine supplier. They used Mercedes power in 2015. During that
Lotus.
year, yep, Lotus. That's why I meant Team Enstone. And also before they went with Renault, they won the World Championship in '94 with Michael Schumacher. So I don't see them changing the engine supply. I think Renault will probably want to be completely in F1. They don't want to be like half-hearted, because there is still that feeling that they want to start winning racing. They want to start winning now. It's just not come. And the problem is, at the moment, there is a lot of tension in that team. You've got one driver who is already on his way out. As we know, Esteban Ocon got announced at the weekend last weekend to be leaving Alpine. His future is very much up in the air. And Pierre Gasly is seemingly becoming more and more the Alpine team leader at the moment. And of course, lastly, we had the issue regarding the swap around in the final few laps, which angered Ocon, particularly in the media, but he is driving for his F1 future, so he's going to be more and more feisty. I think the buck stops with Bruno Famin. He needs to get this team under control and say, look, we need to work together as a team. We're in a hole at the moment. We don't even look like we're going to finish sixth in the Constructors' Championship. We're going to be behind Minardi, or RB, to anyone who reads the standings. And they need to up their game when it comes back to the European season. This is a perfect chance to get upgrades in, perfect chance to work on this year's car, because next year's car is going to be an evolution, because of course we have the new regulations coming in 2026. So teams are not really focusing all that much on 2025. So Famin needs to get the drivers together and say, we cannot have a repeat of Canada. We cannot have a repeat of Monaco. We need to start getting more and more points on the board, and we need to work together as a team, because you never know what's going to happen. You could be 12 and 13 for 2 laps to go, 2 or 3 DNFs, boom, double points. That's not going to work if your two drivers are hitting each other, squabbling, and you're having a communication meltdown. So there needs to be a semblance of control or leadership. Famin is trying to show it, but he's just not really getting hold of the reins. So this will be the Spanish Grand Prix will be a crucial one for Alpine. They need to start getting on the board rapidly, but they need to know, first off, where they are in terms of pace-wise.
The sense or the feeling I'm getting from Bruno Famin is not that I'm judging his sense of leadership in that team. It's more like of, when you never thought you're going to be in a position, but then somebody comes like, here, you're going to be in this position, and just put you there. Like, I need you to be in this position. Or in football, or what in US called soccer, but in Europe, football. In football, you have like a team that's having a crisis, and then they fire the coach, and then they just bring a sub coach to sit in that team for this moment, for this season, until they figure out who they want to actually sign to run the team as a coach and all that. I feel like Bruno Famin is in that position of that, as if he's just the sub coach who has to sit there. And I'm not saying he doesn't care about the team. He's trying to do his hardest, but he also has that feeling in the air that he's not even so sure about his position in the team. Because not that the car is not performing well, it's also like the team as a whole is not kept together. And who is the first person they're gonna look into and point fingers at when they need to find a way how to deal with the sponsors? You, team principal, get out. We've seen this with many other names in Alpine or Renault. Laurent Rossi was the first person to be out there pointing fingers and firing people. Then when sponsors put the pressure in, they're like, right, Rossi, you're out. And I think the person who could be next in line for this, it could be Bruno, given the fact that he, I wouldn't say it was a moment of anger, but it's just like the decision was one of the quickest decisions I've ever seen in my life. Like, you just, after one incident, and you go like, right, Ocon, bad boy, you're out of this team. And I'm not saying what Ocon did was right, but it's just like that quick decision making. They're like, yeah, out. So as like it's like they're trying to find their scapegoat every time and now and then to stay with that little bit around that budget and have some money flow and sponsor flow within the team. And which is looks like I don't think any of the major Hollywood stars and athletes that are currently who bought shares in the team really that much into like focusing on what Alpine is doing. But it could come the day when they all sit there and be like, okay, guys, yeah, it's all fun. We bought the sponsors. Yeah, we come to the paddock. We laugh, take smiles, pictures, and all that. But time to talk to the real business. What's going on in this team and why is this not working anymore? And I think, as you mentioned, Ed, yeah, it will come to the point where they have to decide. If I was them, and this is where we're going to come to, I think we have about 15 minutes to our final point. If I was Alpine or Renault, I'm not going to call them Alpine, focus on becoming an engine manufacturer. Let Andretti be in, give him the engine, put all your money resources into having good power unit, build a good power unit for your WEC series, build a good power unit for your F1 series. And I'm sure many teams on that grid, if they're going to see that there's a good performance out of that engine, they would as well want to sign it. It's something similar to what Mercedes has been doing in F1. They joined as an engine manufacturer for many years. They rejoined the F1 as an engine manufacturer for many years, and then once they got it right, they're like, right, now we want to join as a team. So if anything, I think Renault should just take a few steps back, do that, and walk their way back into F1 on a strong force. I could be saying all this, and then they could just surprise me and tell me, Ahmed, hold your L. Here we are back again, fighting for top fives or something. But if we're gonna bring about Andretti, I really don't want to just dwell much in it. Bryson, your thoughts, and what do you think this man has to do after even calling the Pentagon at this rate to be in F1?
Wow. Again, as much as I would love to see Andretti in F1, I don't think Alpine Renault is going to sell their operation, even though they probably should sell some part of it. The turnover at the company has been kind of insane recently, and they're kind of in a free fall state. So I definitely believe and I agree that some changes needed for them to do something to get things where they need to go. But I don't think they're actually going to sell to anyone. As far as Andretti goes, it's been a very bizarre situation because it's almost like Andretti put Formula One in a situation where they have to take some kind of action to make themselves look a little less foolish. It's almost like, well, initially it was you're not bringing value to the sport, you're not adding anything to the sport. Andretti says, okay, well, we're going to bring in a manufacturer or an OEM support to help support our teams. Like, well, you're not adding to the personnel, you're not adding to the culture, I guess, of Formula One. They built a 100,000 square foot facility, employing a lot of people. They've done everything that any reasonable team would want to do. At a minimum, if F1 wants to say, hey, listen, we don't want you in our sport because we just want more money. It's okay. We just want more money. We don't want to split the pie anymore. I would respect us more if that's what we said as Formula One as a community. But that's not what they've said. They've said everything else under the sun except for that. All of these phantom reasons why the team can't be admitted. And I almost would appreciate just a more straightforward claim saying we just don't want any possibility of losing money, let alone the actual reality of it. We don't even want the chance of it happening. So that's already a concern. But also, when you look at some of the things that have happened recently with the FIA sort of lowering the minimum driving age for super license, for Kimi Antonelli, presumably, displaying a clear willingness to modify the rules for a person that they want to actually be in the sport. And you contrast that to how other drivers were treated, specifically Colton Herta, who had also some issues with, super license points and things. But a race winner in an IndyCar, a high level of professional motorsports, automobile motorsports, and in that situation, the rules were just the rules, and they can't be modified. So it just it smacks of not outright favoritism as such, but it does feel like certain groups and entities are treated fundamentally differently than others. If you come up through the pre-approved channels, then they'll let you into the club. But if you don't, there seems to be a huge amount of resistance. So I'm not sure what the trajectory of Andretti is. I definitely would love to wake up one day and hear the news that Andretti has found their way into the sport. But you mentioned something about not necessarily the Pentagon, but Congress getting involved. That's already a bad situation. That's already a bad situation because let's say they were successful. Imagine they're successful and Congress applies its power over Liberty Media, a U.S. company, and says something is wrong here. Fundamentally, you should allow Andretti into the sport. If they do that, Liberty Media is allowing Andretti in under coercion, essentially under duress, and they're going to not treat Andretti like the partner in this enterprise as they really should be treated. They're going to be treated as someone they just have to accept because they were told to, not because they want to. We want to find a situation where a new team is being added to the grid by their own volition, right? Not because they're forced to from without. So I really hope that we find some kind of way forward because I think that more sports in general, and F1 specifically, benefit from more teams for sure.
Ed, I'm sure you've been following the stories and you kept an eye on this for a while. Straightforward, do you think there's a chance anywhere near in the future? Could it be just Andretti joining as a team, or Andretti joining as buying off another team?
Well, they tried to buy Sauber in 2021. That, of course, fell at the last minute. I don't know if they would buy Alpine because there is a big problem. If Alpine say we want you to keep the engine base at Viri, when in reality when they signed it with GM and via Cadillac, you risk losing a big partner, and then you're basically giving all your critics the ammunition to go at you. So I think Andretti will eventually, something's got to give. I would like to see him on the grid, and I think they will get on the grid, but I don't suspect they'll get in at the start of the regulations. I think maybe 2028 would be a potential starting point, test the waters out, see what the regs are doing, see if other teams can have a go. Because I still feel, in my personal opinion, that 20 cars is too small. We need 26. 26 cars so we can get the opportunities in, get these drivers in, so we can have the cream of the crop really going at it. And there's so many teams that the last entry process, like iTech and Carlin, they didn't get in either. So why don't they have a go as well? So I would like to see it, but of course there is the risk, as Bryson said, of potentially them being allowed in and then being completely forgotten about. Bearing in mind, there's also the TV rights, hospitality. You also have other stuff going around. There is that issue that their cars might not even be viewed on television. And that's not happened since 1976 when Surtees ran with Durex condoms as a sponsorship, and the BBC refused to broadcast the Grand Prix because of it. So I'm worried. I have my concerns because I think the sport in itself really could do with this saga ending now, because it's getting out of control and it's getting messy.
I know we have about 7 minutes left on the clock. I may take I will chunk a few minutes out of your time, gentlemen. And there's one topic that I completely left out of the window, and I think people would love to hear about it, and that is Lewis Hamilton and the current form with Mercedes and everything in Mercedes. I'm gonna go first, and I'll give you the honors to be the one to close up with what do you have to say. I think it's getting a little bit dicey in the Mercedes team. It's like, I get it. I get it why they're trying to leave Lewis out of a couple of things in the Mercedes garage. It's not out of that they hate him now, but the fact that he's going to their rival team, and that's one of the teams that they want to be competing against in the upcoming seasons. and obviously any slip of information that could come in handy for the competition, and let's say Ferrari, um, it might not be good for Mercedes. Not just good in terms of them not being in a good position in terms of constructors and drivers standing, but it could be just even in terms of sponsors, because who knows how many sponsors could leave after Lewis departs Mercedes. And we are already seeing a little bit of signs here and there from it. Um, but I still think the major players in the Mercedes sponsorship board, they're going to remain there. Um, in terms of what we've been seeing from, I think Lewis have had some poor form in qualifying. The race pace is there, and we have seen it over and over again. Either you see it through data, either you see it through multiple things. You will always see that Lewis is faster than George in the race pace. Qualifying is just there's always something that like that operating window just slips out of his hand. I think, and I've seen it multiple times in Q3. Uh, but also we heard Lewis mentioning in Monaco that he said he knows he's walking into the season. He's going to be, after the announcement going to Ferrari, that he's going to probably be 2 tenths and a half off George in qualifying. Like he already has that in his mind. So if anything extra is just from George, or anything less, then it's just him putting that pace. Um, the one thing that I think we've all people notice is that after Canada, the radio silence from Lewis when Toto came to him on the radio and was like, Lewis, the good thing, the car now is performing well. We know the direction. We can compete. Like any driver would hear that would be like, good. We will hear the usual Lewis radio. Good job, team. Great effort out there in the factory. I would love to, like the Lewis usual radio, but it was just complete silence from him all the way to the pit entry, and like, he didn't even enter the pits. He just dropped the car there and like, yeah, I really don't want to talk now. Um, what do we expect to see from Lewis in? This is to you, Bryson. What do we expect to see from Lewis in the upcomers? Are we going to see that 2018? I don't give a F Lewis, or in the upcoming races, or do we think this is going to remain the same? And the other question is, how do you see Lewis and Charles will be as teammates? Is it going to be the honeymoon phase that people expecting, or it's just going to be straight up competition, basically?
First of all, we already knew right from the very outset when Lewis, or it was announced that Lewis was going to be driving for Ferrari so early in the season, we knew this entire 12-month period was going to be interesting, to say the least. So I can't say we're really surprised that things are a little bit complicated. The exact ways in which that complication manifests itself are interesting, but it's not entirely surprising that there's going to be some challenges there. Again, we could talk about different hardware for different drivers and who gets what when and all these kinds of things. And honestly, it's not something I pay attention to really that much. To me, I mean, a lot of people live and die by this stuff. I don't care as much as I should about it. What I care about is a long and very successful partnership between Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes that is coming to an end. It would be fantastic if that relationship came to an end on a high, with high performances, both from the driver and the team, and also in a situation that doesn't leave bridges burned or any sort of ill feelings there. And that's going to be a difficult road to walk, frankly, just because of the nature of what's going on. I can't even remember a time when we knew a full calendar year in advance of a driver leaving a team in the same way that Lewis had. So that's always going to be an interesting thing. And also, drivers are human beings. Lewis is a phenomenal driver. He's not going to have it every day. Okay. And George Russell, believe it or not, is actually a phenomenal qualifier. And there's a reason why we call him Mr. Saturday. That's not an accident. I mean, he's shown that throughout his entire career. So the fact that those things are as good as they are doesn't really surprise me. Lewis is a phenomenal racer. He's got metronomic race pace and a good feel for the conditions He's always been good at that, but you never really know how things are going to go until you actually get out there racing. What I will say is that in this migration to Ferrari, Charles Leclerc is an even better qualifier than George Russell is. And Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, objectively someone else's team, for the first time, really, is going to be a huge challenge for him. And I think he deserves some credit for being willing to expose himself in that way to some of the most difficult conditions a driver can expose themselves to. He's already a pretty old driver, oldish kind of driver. He's going to a top team. There's going to be a huge amount of pressure. He's going up against a proven race winner in who's very embedded in the team, very comfortable, and he will be going across a regulation set in the second year of that contract. So I think that the opportunity for failure is actually much greater than success. But for him to actually go there anyway and to pursue it as a personal or professional goal is I think, laudable in its own right. As far as the dynamic between Charles and Lewis, I know how their fan bases will react whenever things don't go to plan. I'm sure there's going to be some fireworks on the Twitter space or X space, depending on how we talk about it. So that's going to happen, but I think there's going to be a mutual respect there. I think each of them has some things to teach each other in various ways, and honestly, nothing would make me happier than that pairing coming together and producing just one of the strongest teams we've seen in a while. Add in Adrian Newey to the mix, that would be a phenomenal team. I would just love to see them right off into the sunset and set some new records. So yes, there will be fireworks. There will be calls of conspiracy and machinations behind the scenes. But as far as Lewis and Mercedes right now, just kind of grit your teeth and sort of white knuckle it for these last couple of races, and just hoping that there could be some positive results to speak of at the end of the day. So I'm looking forward to it.
Ed, your thoughts on the whole Charles and Lewis? George and Lewis first, and as Bryson mentioned, he is Mr. Saturday, but Charles is a much better qualifier. The good thing Lewis is, and Lewis mentioned it a couple of times and over again, that he really needs to work a little bit on his qualifying pace, because the race pace is already there. Like, you don't even need to discuss that. And Canada is a big example. Lewis was P7 and George was P1, and they were racing each other at the final stages of the race, which should have not been happening, in my opinion. I know a lot of people will say that because you had Lewis Hamilton fan and all that. No. I'm saying it because you're P1. You should have been up there with Max. You have no business to be with your teammate fighting for a podium spot who started P7. So do we think that Lewis is just going to turn up to a new person in the upcoming races with Mercedes? And also keep in mind, we want to see Lewis finishing in a better ending chapter with Mercedes, or things is just going to keep going the way it is, and we just wait to see what happens with him and Ferrari.
I think Lewis needs to rebound qualifying wise. That is his forte. That's one of his great attributes, is the fact he's very, very good over one lap. So it won't take too long to refine that, and he needs to really find it now. The good thing for Lewis is the fact that there's a number of tracks which he is very, very good at. Spain, he's very good at. Silverstone, he's very good. Hungary, he is arguably one of the best around there. So this shouldn't really be an issue. It's just, I think he's also looking at the future, and I think he's also looking at, having one eye of, having a feeling of, where am I going to stack up towards Charles? Because Charles, as people mentioned, is a very good qualifier. So he needs to get that side of that side of his racecraft sorted before he moves to Ferrari. Because if he's on the back foot in qualifying wise, Charles is going to get that extra little bit of edge, and the critics will start. So the next 14 odd races are going to be vital for not just Lewis's 2024 season, which is already, it's been a very interesting one in itself, but also for how he's going to enter his Ferrari chapter when it comes down to when the lights go out in Melbourne.
Oh, well, it is going to be a lot of talks about it. And I think I was about to say I'm not ready for what we're gonna see from 2025, especially from a fan base standpoint. I think we're already seeing that, and I hope and I pray none of that exists actually by the time 2025 is around. But other than that, I think there's a lot of things to be excited about, not just from 2025, but this season itself. And there's more to be looked up into. And yeah, congratulations, first of all, to Ferrari winning the Le Mans with the car number 50. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning of this show, congratulations to Blake on his first Le Mans 2024. Hope you're having good rest and good sleep after all those times of chunky numbers. And to everyone who's just joined up now, please give a good shout out to Bryson and Ed Spencer. You can follow them on X as Ed underscore Spencer. Did I get that right, or is that actually the right one?
Let me Google it 1 second.
You're gonna Google yourself.
Yeah, look, I don't know. It's just Ed Spencer 99, all in one word, capital E.
Okay, yeah, Ed Spencer 99, all in one word. And
Yeah.
to find Mr. Bryson, you're just gonna go and type Bryson. I don't think Bryson needs introduction, but just Bryson Sullivan, and you're gonna find him on X. And once we go offline, you can find this show again. You can rewatch it from the start either on X or YouTube. And thank you very much for being with us. And thank you very much, Ed and Bryson.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.